Very lovely introduction. I welcome you anytime to the Academical Village in Charlottesville. And thanks to everyone here at St. Peter's who has made me feel so welcome, and for the honor, just the great honor of being asked to take part in this commemoration. On April 8th, 1945, 70 years ago today, in an abandoned schoolhouse in the village of Schönberg, in the far hinterlands of Bavaria, Dietrich Bonhoeffer and a small group of prisoners celebrated the second Sunday of Easter with a short worship service. He read Old Testament scriptural passages from the daily Losungen, which that day came from Isaiah 53:5. That he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. Not long after the service concluded, two guards arrived for him. "Prisoner Bonhoeffer, get ready and come with us," one ordered. The SS transported him by bus to the concentration camp at Flossenburg, a village in the Oberpfalz region of Upper Bavaria near the border of Czechoslovakia. For 3 centuries, granite had been mined in the stony ground of the Upper Palatinate forest, so it was not surprising when the Nazis carved the concentration camp into a shallow valley on the outskirts of town. Since 1938, Flossenburg had served the Third Reich as the German stone and building works fabricated building materials by forced labor and quarried granite for the Autobahn and the Reich Party buildings. Among the several thousand prisoners undergoing the SS-designed work cure were Jews, and in addition to Jews, according to Himmler's protocol, vagabonds, beggars, pimps, gypsies, antisocials, along with the men who formed the Pink Triangle, the special section in Flossenburg for homosexuals. The same night, in a hurriedly convened court-martial, Bonhoeffer was arraigned, convicted, and condemned. No witness gave testimony, and the accused was allowed no defense counsel. The next morning, April 9th, Bonhoeffer and 5 others, among them Wilhelm Canaris and Hans Oster, were forced to undress and led naked down the short steps from the detention barracks to the gallows that had been erected against a high brick wall. Bonhoeffer had always lived with premonitions of an early death. He had once told a cousin he would die by the age of 40. Sometimes he would picture himself on his deathbed, surrounded by family and friends, reclining on the very threshold of heaven. He knew what his last words would be, and sometimes rehearsed them aloud, though he dared not reveal them to anyone. He hoped to welcome death as an expected guest. He did not want to be taken by surprise. But sometimes, when he went to bed, convinced that death would come that very night, he would become lightheaded, and the walls of his bedroom would reel about as if he were at the axis of a carousel. He imagined himself rushing from sister to brother, from father to mother, pleading for help. The prospect of its happening now, of his vanishing this night into the vast mysterium, was so real he had to bite his tongue to reassure himself that he was still among the living, that he could feel mortal pain. And at such moments he worried that he suffered from an incurable fear. When he was a young child, and his family rented a sprawling villa near the university clinics in Breslau, Bonhoeffer and his twin sister Sabina lay awake at night trying to imagine eternity. The ritual eventually became a game, with each child concentrating on the word to clear the mind of distractions. eternity, Ewigkeit. Sabina found the word very long and gruesome, but Dietrich found it majestic, an awesome word, he said. When the twins got separate bedrooms, they devised a code for keeping up their metaphysical ruminations. Dietrich would drum lightly on the wall with his fingers, an admonitory knock, announcing that it was once again time to ponder eternity. A further tap signaled a new reflection on the solemn theme, and so it went back and forth until one of them discerned the final silence. Usually it was Dietrich. And with the game concluded, he lay awake, the only light in his room coming from a pair of candlelit crosses his mother had placed atop a corner table. When at night I go to bed, 14 angels round my stead, he would hear his mother sing. He liked the idea very much. One angel dressed in a little white cloak, standing by his bed, and others watching over children everywhere. Bonhoeffer believed the nightly ritual spared him from being devoured by Satan. At least this is what Sabina later wrote. But there are very few references to Satan in her brother's writings, early or late. The devil frightened him hardly at all. God doesn't want human beings to be afraid. He would preach to a congregation in a posh London suburb. God desires only that people reach out passionately and hungrily for mercy and love and grace. Later, after he had finished his first doctoral degree at the University of Berlin at the age of 21, he would preach a Pentecost sermon during a Barcelona spring, and he would speak of God's incandescent beauty, of torches of divine fire, divine clarity, divine light in the midst of a world that has sunk into night. Torches pointing toward the light. Torches with which others can light their own torches. Torches ignited by the magnificence of the divine glory. This is what Jesus wants to make out of us, he said. Torches of the holy. Some hermetic disciplines notwithstanding, he would never be one for sackcloth and ashes. The good things of this world, too, were full of God's glory. Bonhoeffer's longings would remain ever nourished in the humanism of the Incarnation. For the fullness of the risen Lord, he believed, enabled clarity of sight. The knock on Bonhoeffer's door had come on the evening of April 4th, 1943. He was sitting at his desk in his upstairs room in his parents' new home in Charlottenburg, or fairly new home. Some of his writings, including parts of his unfinished ethics, were hidden in the rafters. A fictitious diary he had kept to disguise his conspiratorial activities lay on his desk. He surrendered to Gestapo agents and was led out of the house in handcuffs and into a black Mercedes waiting at the end of the walkway. He was 37 years old. The same spring day, his brother-in-law, Hans von Dohnanyi, was apprehended, along with his wife, Christina von Dohnanyi, Bonhoeffer's sister. In the following year, other intimates would be arrested. Klaus Bonhoeffer, Dietrich's older brother, in October of 1944, their brother-in-law Rudiger Schleicher on October 4th, and Eberhard Bethke on October 30th. Their growing list of Bonhoeffer relations behind bars would lead the chief of the Gestapo to conclude in a summary of charges stemming from the failed July 20th officers' plot that an entire circle of conspirators had emanated from the Bonhoeffer home in Berlin. For now, the charges against Dietrich included offenses related to his UK classification, that is, avoidance of military service, and various minor acts of subversion, among them assisting confessing church pastors and advising students on ways to avoid military service. The indictment further mentioned numerous illicit wartime activities related to his work among the dissident Christian community. What it did not include, however, was any charge of plotting to kill Hitler or of taking part in Operation 7, a plan designed by Hans von Dohnanyi that successfully transported 14 Jews across the Swiss border into Basel, near Basel, or any other crimes of conspiracy or treason. Bonhoeffer would remain in prison for more than a year before his interrogators gained knowledge of these further illegal involvements. By the end of the year, Bonhoeffer had settled into a regular rhythm of reading and writing in his cell in Tegel prison in Berlin. He would structure his days according to the church calendar. He followed the readings and prayers of the hours in his Losungen, the Moravian prayer book his governess had given him as a child and which he had read every day of his life. He read the Bible with an uncommon intensity, all the way through the Old Testament, 2.5 times, he told his friend Eberhard, in his first 6 months of incarceration. A solemn but hopeful phrase inspired the liturgical shape of his days. Waiting with Christ in Gethsemane. Meditation, thanksgiving, prayer, praise, lament. In his first Christmas in prison, he had hummed carols and hymns to himself, adorned his Adventskranz with a reproduction of Lippi's Nativity, and feasted on a delicious ostrich egg. He consoled fellow prisoners and guards alike. "Pastor, please pray that we have no alarm tonight," the sergeant once whispered. Even the medical orderlies became attached to him and often sat up late talking with him in the sick quarters. Ever hopeful in the mercies of the Lord, the failure of the July 20th, 1944 coup attempt would, however, usher in a new phase of imprisonment. In subsequent letters, the first dated the following day, July 21st, 1944, he expressed the hope that despite his premonition of impending death, he might live to enjoy Maria von Wedemeyer, his young fiancée, as he had once relished his years with Eberhard Bethke, his dearest friend. But not long thereafter, the correspondence with Wedemeyer came to an end, even as his letters to Bethke became charged with a new energy. A fresh awareness began to inform Bonhoeffer's writings, and it coincided with an intuition that he, contrary to earlier optimism during his first year in prison, was not to get out alive. There had been intimations of a theological transformation in earlier efforts. Still, when Eberhard read Bonhoeffer's meditations on religionless Christianity and A World Come of Age, written between the spring of 1944 and Christmas, when the letters ended abruptly, Bethke expressed surprise, delight, and some dismay. Questions that had been raised over the course of their long friendship resurfaced with singular intensity under the impression of total war and the expectation that it was only a matter of time before Bonhoeffer's involvement in a capital crime was uncovered. He attested in these letters to Eberhard to having undergone a great liberation from guilt and self-doubt in recent weeks. What had stirred it? Discipline, control, ardor, These were attributes of character to which he had long aspired, demanded even by his father's strenuous example, and insofar as he had attained them, they would sustain him until the end. But as of late, he had looked for and found a certain spiritual relief in a different aspect of mind. He discovered the quality of hilaritas, hilarity, a certain high-spirited self-confidence, speaking the yes and the amen in gleeful defiance of the nothing, a cheerful audacity. Spread hilaritas, exclamation mark, he directed to Eberhard in a kind of eureka. Bonhoeffer said that his reading had of late been a random mixture of things: a history of Scotland Yard, a history of prostitution, Reinhold Schneider's sonnets, which are of uneven quality, some are very good, he said. He'd read George Santayana's The Last Puritan. He also read a huge English novel, this is his words, it goes from 1500 to the present, written by Hugh Walpole in 1909. He read Wilhelm Dilthey, who he found very interesting, and for an hour a day, he studied the Army Medical Corps Handbook for any eventuality, he noted. On the whole, in all the most recent productions, by which Bonhoeffer did not mean Walpole and the military manuals, but in this sense, the moderns, writers he did not particularly admire, or he admired but didn't share their taste, Mann and Hesse, and perhaps in music, Honegger and Schoenberg. In these modern productions, I miss the hilaritas, the plucky cheerfulness, which every truly great and free intellectual achievement should possess. One keeps having the impression of rather tormented and strained work rather than free, creative pleasure. Do you know what I mean? Hilaritas had first leapt off the page only when Bonhoeffer read the most recent installment in prison of Karl Barth's Church Dogmatics. This, Volume 2, Section 2. And it then leapt off the page like a vision of dappled things, and in any case, illuminated a new way of seeing. So that now he discerned hilaritas shimmering and sparkling in all of humanity's beautiful and good creations. And the triumph of grace as narrated over 500 pages in Barth's glorious recasting of the doctrine of double predestination in Raphael and Mozart and Walter von der Vogelweide and the Knight of Bamberg and Lessing and Luther and Rubens, Hugo Wolf, to name a few. In these lives and works, there was boldness, audacity, and a willingness to defy the world and popular opinion, a living out of the firm conviction that with one's work one is giving the world something good even if the world is not pleased with it and doesn't like it. Ignited by hilaritas, Bonhoeffer opened his mind anew to the knowledge accumulated over the years and that had formed him as a child of the Bildungsbürgertum, the ancient church fathers Irenaeus and Augustine, the medieval philosopher Nicholas of Cusa, the Dutch jurist Hugo Grotius, the pillars of the Enlightenment, the Romantics, even the great system builders, Kant, Hegel, Fichte, and of course Kierkegaard, the great critic of the system, the great knight of infinite resignation. They had all become alive and free again for him from the perspective of a higher satisfaction. Now, in his consciousness, all these would coalesce into what would remain some of the freshest, most vivid, and yet confounding theological meditations of the modern era. He would, from his cell, even retell the story of modernity from a new perspective. God, as a working hypothesis, no longer required, he said, in accord with the philosophical secularist. No longer required for science, politics, morality, philosophy, religion. In the year before his death, he grasped an enlivening worldly freedom that felt closer, even in its great questions, to the gospel than formal religiosity, or certainly closer to the gospel than the heroic pursuit of saintliness, which he now worried in prison that he had overstated in his book, The Cost of Discipleship. We are approaching a completely religionless age. People, as they are now, simply cannot be religious anymore. Even those who honestly describe themselves as religious aren't really practicing that at all. They presumably mean something quite different by religious. He asked, how can Christ become Lord of the religionless as well? If religion is only the garb in which Christianity is clothed, and this garb has looked very different in different ages, what then is religionless Christianity? He asked, what is Christianity? He asked the question, who is Christ for us today? He even asked the question, who is God? Bonhoeffer's answers and questions revealed a faith chastened by history, mindful of its failures and misuses, imprisoned by consequence, and yet abidingly and hilariously confident that Jesus Christ had broken the chains of death. What I mean, he wrote, is that God wants us to love him eternally with our whole hearts, and not in such a way as to injure or weaken our earthly love, but to provide a kind of cantus firmus to which the other melodies of life provide the counterpoint. The same month, Bonhoeffer was transferred to the SS prison in the Reich Central Security Headquarters on Prince Albrechtstrasse, and there began a descent into the hell of solitary confinement, torture, and concentration camps. Along with visiting privileges, there would soon come an end to all contact with the outside world. Fabian von Schlabendorf, the July 20th conspirator, recalled his great surprise upon seeing Bonhoeffer in the subterranean corridor of this SS prison in this place called the topography of Terra. Between 1933 and 1945, nearly 15,000 political opponents of the Reich were detained in those dark catacombs, and it was the master of death, Reinhard Heydrich himself, who, while serving as the head of the political police in Berlin, had designed the facility to effect what he called police custody of a very particular kind. Heightened interrogations, another term of Heydrich's, as they were called, took place on the upper floors of the South Wing and were often conducted by Gestapo volunteers who had been passed over for ordinary post. Still, he betrayed no sign of despair, Schlabendorf said, of this surprise encounter. And he would cheer me up and comfort me. And many little notes he would slip into my hands in which he had written biblical words of comfort and hope. And then, on their last encounter, Schlabendorf recalled Bonhoeffer saying to him, spread hilaritas. It was as if the words had become a kind of refrain. By Christmas of the year 1944, Bonhoeffer knew that his fate was sealed. In final letters to his parents and to Eberhard that evaded detection, he offered tender reassurances to his family. And he bade farewell, eternally grateful, he said, for the liberating fresh air that had enabled so much freedom and growth. Awkward misunderstandings that had existed sometimes between Dietrich and Eberhard now seemed a thing of the past, he said. That which is fragmentary may point to a higher fulfillment. That which can no longer be achieved by human effort. And he told Eberhard that everything that remains unfinished, and the loss of so many things, rushes towards a great liberation. And this, his relationship to Eberhard, like all the loves he had given up, though first among them, had returned to him once more, transfigured in a final beatific surrender. He said he had come across a stanza from a Storm poem that resonated with this mood and echoed over and over in my thoughts like a melody one can't get out of one's mind. If outside it's all gone mad and Christian ways are other, still is the world, this gorgeous world, ever resilient. A few flowers within view of the cell window, a half hour's exercise in the prison yard, a shimmering linden tree, minor glories seemed now enough to confirm the transcendent one. In the end, he said, the world is summed up, isn't it? And the few people one wants to see and with whom one wishes to be together. In prison, Bonhoeffer had enjoyed inscribing from memory the musical notations of sacred songs. He transcribed the staves of Heinrich Schütz, O Bone Jesu, which we mentioned during the Vespers. From the Kleine Geistliche Konzerte, a gentle meditation on the restoration of all earthly desire, tendered by the kind Jesus, word of the Father, splendor of the Father's glory. Nothing is lost, Bonhoeffer wrote alongside these meticulous notations. All things are taken up, preserved, become transparent, clear. Such is the joyance of recapitulation, magnificent, consummately consoling. In time, Bonhoeffer, in prison, even reached a new appreciation of the peculiar discipline to which he had given his life and which he had pursued since the age of 14, when he announced to the slightly aghast family of prodigious humanists that he would be a theologian. Now Bonhoeffer thinks of theology's purpose is that of simply preserving the mystery from a tragically demystified time. It's a great mistake to think of theology's purpose as being the unveiling of that mystery, to bring it down to the flat, ordinary wisdom of experience and reason. Theology should, rather, as its sole mission, aim to preserve mystery as mystery, God's wonder as wonder, to defend God's glory as mystery. By the way, he wrote, I notice more and more how much I am thinking and perceiving things in line with the Old Testament. In recent months, he told Eberhard, I have been reading Much more the old than the new. And then comes a kind of litany of existential beatitude in this remarkable series of letters. Only when one knows the name of God, and only when one knows that the name of God may not be uttered, may one sometimes speak the name of Jesus. Only when one loves life on the earth so much that with it everything seems to be lost, and at its end may one believe in the resurrection of the dead and in a new world. Formed as a Christian in discipleship to Jesus, Bonhoeffer realized finally that genuine humanness would forever wander into abstraction if it were not anchored in the history, suffering, and religion of the Jews. He asked, does the saving of one's soul and the whole question of personal salvation come up in the Old Testament? Isn't God's righteousness and kingdom on earth the center of everything? And isn't Romans 3:24 and following in the New Testament the culmination of the view that God alone is righteous rather than an individualistic doctrine of salvation? What matters is not the beyond, but this world. How it is created and preserved, is given laws, reconciled, and renewed. His faith had grown more at home in the Old Testament as he reached the extraordinary conclusion that whoever wishes to be and perceive things too quickly and too directly in the New Testament is, to my mind, no Christian. And with a new sense of worldly habitation, were unleashed unfamiliar desires and energies long restrained. On a hot summer afternoon in Tegel prison, Bonhoeffer would sit in his cell wearing a pair of gym shorts and a dress shirt, both items he had bought for his friend Eberhard in Stockholm. Bonhoeffer was spending another day mulling over his non-religious interpretation of the Bible. But the concrete bodily experience of heat, he said, was simply overpowering. So he had to pause in his letter. The heat, he continued, and he began writing again, had awakened my animal existence, my corporeal being, with a singular urgency, not just to see the sun and sip at it a little, but to experience it bodily. He longed to feel again the potencies of the sun, and his memory ranged languorously over summers past. With his brother Klaus in Rome and in Libya in 1923, on his trip with Eberhard to Naples in 1936, to the colors of the sun hitting the Mediterranean as observed on the ferry to Majorca, that warm, splendid Christmas spent in Cuba in 1931. He pondered from his prison cell the romantic enthusiasm for the sun, the cults of the sun gods. Does it make Goethe or Napoleon a sinner to say they weren't always faithful husbands? Bonhoeffer asked abruptly. He made a pitch for strong sins and sins of strength. Sins dared for the sake of the other, for the purpose of nurturing intimacy with others. And he happily bade farewell to a caution mistaken for sanctity, and conversely, the perverse satisfaction in knowing that every person has failings and weak spots. He thanked Eberhard for his long-suffering patience with his many volatile moods. He did not deserve such patience, but he was grateful for it. I have learned from you to see many things in a new way, he said. And he might have said more precisely, owing to you rather than from you. But that would not have changed the ultimate consequence of their association, which was this. Finally, at the age of 38 and with nothing left to lose. He felt free of the yoke of scrupulous introspection. The Word of God does not ally itself with the rebellion of mistrust, he said, but it reigns in the strangest of glories. Finally, his gift to his family on the Christmas before his death had been a poem entitled Von Guten Mädchen, or From All Good Powers. We sang that in Vespers. This would mark Dietrich's last word to them and one of his last bits of written expression before being deported from Berlin. The city now lay in ruins. Whole streets had disappeared under piles of cascading rubble. Smoke filled the air, and broken water lines created vast sheets of black ice. But still, the Gestapo was about its work. He said that the lines that had been running through his head for several days were these: 7 verses, he recalled, of iambic pentameter, the standard of classical German sonnets, written in the 6th Advent season of the war. This astonishing poem, or hymn, Von Guten Mädchen, breathes mortal longings and is finally a prelude to eternity. By faithful quiet powers of good surrounded, so wondrously consoled and sheltered here, I wish to live these days with you in spirit and with you enter into a new year. I'm not going to read it all because we sang it a minute ago, but should you wish now once again to give us the joys of this world and its glorious Son, then we'll recall anew what past times brought us, and then our life belongs to you. But when now the quiet deepens all around us, oh, let our hearts that fullest sound amaze at this, your world invisibly expanding, as all your children sing hymns of praise. It would be a fine thing if one could enter the new year in the physical presence of family and friends, and in, by all good powers, he allows, if it's possible, do reunite us. Still, as he comprehended that death was imminent, his association with the July 20th conspirators having now quashed any hope of release. The voices of the past, beautiful family and friends, faded to the deepest quiet. What would take their place? On the threshold of eternity, Bonhoeffer heard a new song. The worldly song was indeed exquisite. The hissing glades and woodland murmurs of Friedrichsbrunn, the wind whispering through linden forest, yet the music of the heavenly choirs, invisibly expanding, as all your children sing high hymns of praise, was that fullest sound, engendering amazement. He recalled the children's song about the angels, 2 who cover me, 2 who awaken me, and aloud in a letter that he felt protection now, night and day, by invisible powers of good. This is how I read by all good powers. In the hell that was the Gestapo interrogation prison, Bonhoeffer was graced with the visitation of angels. The great invisible realm had now become visible, and there remained, he said, no longer any doubt about its real existence. 2 weeks later, on January 17, 1945, in a letter to his parents written in pencil he turned to the matter of his personal effects. He asked his mother to give all his clothes to the Volksopfer, public relief effort, and he enumerated these: his dinner jacket, his felt hats, his salt and pepper suit, which is too small now anyway, he wrote, his pair of brown loafers. He expressed confidence that by now his dear mama would have a better idea than he of what he still owned. In short, give away whatever anyone might need without a second thought. Mindful of his parents' fragility and the needs of others to the end. And yet, I might add this before closing. The famous last words attributed to Bonhoeffer in the hour of his death: "This is not the end for me, it is the beginning of life," are those of a British intelligence officer writing 5 years after the war. They are an eloquent farewell and true to Bonhoeffer's convictions, but the officer was not present when Bonhoeffer was summoned to the gallows in Flossenburg. In any event, his last written words seem more fitting, I think, for the pastor who had come to feel uneasy with pious language. "Please, Mom, drop off some stationery with the commissar." Thank you.